My mom said over dessert, "I wish you were never born." Everyone laughed, except me. Then I put my name is Camilla. I'm 30 years old, and this is the story of how I disappeared from a family that never really saw me in the first place. It happened over dessert, the supposed sweetest part of the night. My mom's words sliced through the cheerful clinking of forks against plates. "I wish you were never born." Everyone laughed. A sharp, ugly sound. My older brother Lucas let out a booming chuckle. My younger sister Emily hid a smirk behind her wine glass. Even Dad, my dad, chuckled into his napkin as if Mom had just told the funniest joke in the world. I didn't. I set my fork down on the edge of my untouched slice of cheesecake. I could feel the heat rising in my cheeks, a burning blush of humiliation. But on the outside, I made myself smile. It was a faint, thin thing, a crack in the ice. "Then," I said, my voice surprisingly steady, "I guess you'll love what I'm about to do next." The room went silent, a glass-shatter stillness where the laughter had just been. Every eye was on me, confused, a little annoyed that I had ruined the punchline. That was the moment I stopped being their joke. But before I tell you how everything flipped, like and subscribe and drop a comment to let me know where you are watching from. In our family, I was the responsible one. That's what they called me, usually with a sigh that was part relief, part dismissal. It sounded like a compliment, a badge of honor for being the most dependable, but it wasn't. Responsible was just a prettier word for invisible. It meant I was the one who didn't need anything, didn't want anything, and didn't cause any trouble. I was the sturdy, plain foundation that everyone else built their more exciting, more chaotic, more important lives upon. I was the free babysitter for Lucas's kids on a Friday night, the silent errand runner for Mom's last-minute dinner party needs, the one who remembered everyone's birthdays but got a store-bought cake for mine, usually picked up by me on my way home from a 12-hour shift at the hospital. My life was a landscape of quiet competence, lived mostly under the harsh, sterile lights of St. Jude's Hospital. As a trauma nurse, my days were measured in beeping machines, whispered consultations, and the visceral, metallic smell of blood. I was good at my job. I could insert an IV into a rolling vein in a moving ambulance, perform CPR until my arms screamed with exhaustion, and tell a family their loved one was gone with a compassion that was both gentle and firm. In the emergency room I was seen, I was vital. My skills mattered. I would finish a shift, my body aching and my mind numb from the sheer emotional weight of it all, and feel a sense of profound purpose. I saved lives. I mattered. Then I would step out of the automatic doors of the hospital, back into the civilian world, and drive the 20 minutes to my parents' house for Sunday dinner, and all of that would vanish. I would become Camilla, the responsible one, the background character. My older brother Lucas was the golden child. He was a financial advisor who wore sharp suits that cost more than my monthly rent and had a loud, confident laugh that filled every room, silencing all other conversation. Everything he did was a monumental achievement. When he made partner at his firm, my parents threw a party that cost more than my first car. They framed the newspaper announcement and hung it in the center of the living room wall. When his wife, Sarah, had their first son, you would have thought a royal heir had been born. Lucas could do no wrong. I remember the time he forgot their 5th wedding anniversary. Sarah was justifiably devastated. My phone buzzed at 6 p.m. It was a frantic string of texts from Lucas. "Cammy, I messed up. Big time, it's my anniversary. I forgot," Sarah's crying. A moment later, "You're good at this stuff. What do I do?" I was just sitting down to my first real meal in 2 days, a simple bowl of soup. I sighed, pushed it aside, and pulled up a browser on my phone. An hour later, a bouquet of 24 roses, a gift certificate to a spa, and a reservation at the city's most romantic restaurant were all secured, all paid for with my credit card. The card attached to the note read, "To my one and only. All my love, Lucas." He texted me a simple "THX Cammy, you are a lifesaver," and promised to pay me back. He never did. A week later at Sunday dinner, Sarah was glowing, showing off the diamond earrings Lucas had surprised her with. She hugged me and said, "You should find a guy like your brother, Camilla." So thoughtful. I just smiled. My younger sister, Emily, was the creative spirit. She was an artist, which in our family meant she was professionally flaky and emotionally volatile. She floated through life on a cloud of vague promises and artistic temperament. She forgot birthdays, missed important events, and was always in some kind of financial jam, but it was all forgiven with a wave of a hand. "That's just Emily," Mom would say with an indulgent smile. "You can't put a free spirit in a box." So, we didn't. We just paid for the box, the art supplies that went in it, and the rent on the studio where she kept it. Her crises were legendary. I'd get calls at 3 a.m. from a sobbing Emily, convinced she was a fraud and that her artistic vision had abandoned her. I'd have a shift in 3 hours, my alarm set for the brutal hour of 4:45, but I would stay on the phone, my voice low and soothing, talking her down from the ledge of her own self-drama. Your work has value, Em. You have a unique voice. I would murmur the platitudes, the encouragements, my own exhaustion a heavy blanket threatening to suffocate me. She would soak up the validation, and once she was calm, she'd say, "Oh my God, what time is it? You probably have work. Sorry. Thanks, Cammy. You're the best." Then she'd hang up, and I'd be left staring at the ceiling, my chance for sleep gone, my body already aching in anticipation of the long day ahead. And then there was me, Camilla, the nurse, the one who lived in a small, clean apartment 20 minutes away. My home was my sanctuary, the only place where I didn't have to be anyone's support system. It was decorated in calm shades of gray and blue, with a single, thriving fiddle leaf fig tree in the corner that I was immensely proud of. My life was orderly and quiet. I paid my bills on time. I had a small savings account that I diligently added to with every paycheck. I was, by all accounts, a successful, independent adult. But in my family's world, my success was boring. My independence wasn't a virtue. It was a convenience for them. It meant I didn't need anything, so they didn't have to give anything. My stability wasn't something to be celebrated. It was something to be used. I was the family's sturdy, reliable human safety net. They'd call me when their car broke down, when they needed someone to watch the kids, when a bill was overdue and they were a little short this month. I always said yes. I always fixed it. I always paid. I thought that if I was useful enough, helpful enough, responsible enough, one day they would finally see me, see the person behind the function I served. I brought the pies to family dinners, hoping someone would ask me about my day. They'd say, "This is delicious, Cammy," but they never said, "You look tired. Was it a hard shift?" The pie was seen, but the person who brought it was not. I remember one particular Tuesday. I had just finished a brutal weekend of double shifts. A multi-car pileup on the freeway had flooded the ER, and I had barely slept for 48 hours. I was bone tired, the kind of exhaustion that seeps into your soul. All I wanted was to crawl into bed and sleep for a decade. My phone rang as I was unlocking my apartment door. It was Mom. "Cammy, sweetie, thank God you picked up," she said, her voice a whirlwind of manufactured panic. "I'm in a terrible bind. The caterer for the foundation dinner tonight just called. They forgot the dessert platters. Can you run to that little French bakery you like and pick up an assortment of pastries?" A big assortment. I leaned my head against my door, the cool wood a small comfort. "Mom, I just got home from a double. I haven't slept." My voice was flat with exhaustion. There was a pause. Not a sympathetic pause. An impatient one. "Oh, right. Well, this will only take an hour, tops. You can sleep after. It's for your father's big charity event. It's important. He's the guest of honor. It was always important. Someone else is important. My exhaustion, my need for rest, was never as important as the family's latest manufactured crisis. The unspoken message was clear. Your work is just a job, but our social standing is a legacy. So I said what I always said. The words tasted like ash in my mouth. "Okay, Mom, I'll do it." I didn't go to bed. I went to the French bakery. I spent over $200 of my own money on eclairs, fruit tarts, and macarons, because I knew my mother would forget to pay me back and asking would make me seem petty. I carefully drove them to the fancy hotel downtown, my hands shaking slightly from fatigue. I navigated through the service entrance, a world away from the glittering ballroom, and handed the heavy boxes off to a grateful event coordinator. I never got a thank you from my mom or dad. I saw them from the doorway across the massive room. They were laughing with the mayor, my father holding a glass of champagne, my mother radiant in a new gown. They were the stars of the show. I was just the invisible stagehand, making sure the props were in place. Driving home, the city lights blurred through my tired eyes. I felt that familiar ache in my chest, a hollow space where appreciation was supposed to be. For 30 years, I had been playing my part perfectly, because on some deep, childish level, I believed it was the only way to earn their love. I was beginning to understand I wasn't earning love. I was just sustaining a transaction. Being fine was the loneliest word in the world. It was a label they gave me early on, a convenient excuse to look away, to focus their attention on the squeakier wheels of my brother and sister. "Oh, Camilla will handle it. She's fine. Don't worry about Camilla. She's always fine." It wasn't a compliment about my resilience. It was a dismissal of my needs. A permission slip they wrote for themselves to not have to worry about me. And the proof was everywhere. scattered throughout my life like a trail of breadcrumbs leading back to the same empty place where my achievements went to die. The first time I truly understood it, the first time the word fine felt like a slap, I was 14. Science was my refuge. In the messy, unpredictable world of my family, the clear rules and predictable outcomes of chemistry and biology were a comfort. I had spent 3 months hunched over Petri dishes and research papers for the regional science fair. My project was on antibiotic resistance in common household bacteria, a topic I found endlessly fascinating. I poured all my quiet, intense focus into it, culturing samples in my bedroom until it smelled like a strange mix of bleach and damp earth. My parents barely registered what I was doing. Dad would ruffle my hair and say, "Still playing with germs, kiddo?" Mom would wrinkle her nose and say, "Camilla, whatever that is, it's starting to smell up the whole hallway." The day of the fair was a blur of nervous energy. I stood by my trifold poster board, explaining my methodology to a series of stern-faced judges. I loved it. I loved the precision, the knowledge, the feeling of being an expert in my own small corner of the universe. When they called my name for first place in the senior division, I felt a shockwave of pure joy. It was a physical sensation, a lightness in my chest that made me feel like I could float. I walked onto the stage, shook the superintendent's hand, and accepted the large, gaudy blue ribbon and the small, heavy trophy. For the first time, I felt truly seen. I practically vibrated with excitement on the bus ride home, clutching my trophy. This, I thought, this they will have to see. This is not just fine. This is exceptional. I burst through the front door. "I'm home! You won't believe what happened." The house was tense. I found my parents in the living room. My mother was on the phone, her voice tight with anguish. My father was pacing the length of the oriental rug, his hands shoved in his pockets, his face a mask of thunder. A real-life crisis was in progress. Lucas, away at a prestigious boarding school my parents could barely afford, had been caught with a few friends drinking beer in the woods behind the dorms. He was being suspended for a week. I stood in the doorway, my ribbon and trophy suddenly feeling cheap and silly. I waited for a pause in the drama. Finally, my mother hung up the phone and promptly burst into tears. I cleared my throat. "Mom, Dad, I won. First place." My mother waved a frantic, dismissive hand at me, her face buried in a tissue. Her voice was muffled and irritated. "Not now, Camilla. For heaven's sake, can't you see we're dealing with something serious? Your brother could be expelled." My father stopped his pacing to glower at me, as if I were the source of this interruption. "That's nice, honey. Just put it on the shelf somewhere. We have to figure out what to do about Lucas. A real crisis." My victory wasn't real. It was a trifle, an inconvenient distraction from the grand opera of Lucas's teenage misbehavior. I felt that soaring feeling in my chest collapse into a dense, heavy knot. I quietly backed out of the room. I walked to the built-in bookcase in the hallway, a shrine to my family's priorities. It was filled with Lucas's sports trophies, gleaming gold figures for soccer, baseball, track, and a few of Emily's more successful pottery projects from elementary school. I found a small, dusty space behind a large MVP award from Lucas's sophomore year and placed my little plastic trophy there. It was almost completely hidden, just like me. I went to my room, closed the door, and didn't say another word about it. The next week, Lucas came home. His punishment consisted of my parents cooking his favorite meals and spending hours talking to him about his future and the pressures of being a young man. My science fair was never mentioned again. 4 years later, the pattern repeated itself, only sharper and more painful. I received my acceptance letter to Johns Hopkins's nursing program, one of the best in the country. It was my absolute dream school, a goal I had worked tirelessly for, balancing a brutal schedule of AP classes with a part-time job waiting tables to save for application fees. I remember holding the thick envelope, my hands trembling. This was it, the key to a life of my own, a life of purpose. I decided to wait until dinner to tell them. I wanted it to be a moment. I imagined their proud smiles, a celebratory toast, maybe even a special dessert. I sat through the meal, my heart thrumming, waiting for the right opening. Finally, as my mom was clearing the plates, I pulled the letter from my pocket. "I have some news," I said, trying to keep my voice steady. "I got in." I slid the letterhead across the table. My dad picked it up and glanced at it. "Johns Hopkins, huh? Good for you, Cam. We knew you would. You're a smart kid." He folded the letter and handed it back to me, then turned to Lucas. "So, did you get the summer internship at the mayor's office?" My mom, on her way to the kitchen, paused to kiss the air near my cheek. "That's wonderful, dear. A nurse. Such a practical, steady job. We won't have to worry about you." She continued into the kitchen, and the conversation immediately shifted to Lucas's internship, his prospects, his future. I sat there, the acceptance letter feeling like a dead weight in my hand. They weren't proud. They were relieved. I had chosen a path that wouldn't require their help, their worry, or their money. I had made myself easy to ignore. 2 months later, Lucas graduated high school. He'd scraped by with a C average and got the internship only because my father was golf buddies with the mayor. To celebrate this stunning achievement, my parents threw a massive backyard barbecue. They rented tents and hired a caterer. As a graduation gift, they bought him a car, a brand new cherry red convertible that had been his dream since he was 16. I watched from the kitchen window as my dad tossed him the keys. Lucas whooped with joy and my mom hugged him, actual tears of pride in her eyes. The sheer, staggering unfairness of it all was a physical blow, knocking the air out of my lungs. I got a verbal pat on the head. He got a party and a car. Years passed, and Emily became the new focus of their parental investment. After dropping out of 2 different colleges, she declared herself a painter. My parents, who had always stressed the importance of a stable career to me, suddenly became passionate patrons of the arts. One evening, I came over for dinner and found them uncharacteristically serious. I had just finished telling them about how my 10-year-old sedan was on its last legs, the repair bills piling up. My dad had looked grim and said money was tight, that I'd have to figure it out on my own. I'd nodded, of course. I always figured it out, but tonight their tone was different. "Camilla," my father started, steepling his fingers, "your mother and I have had a long talk. We believe in supporting our children's dreams." My mom nodded, her eyes shining. "We're giving Emily a launch fund to start her art studio, to give her a real shot at making it." The number was $20,000. The words caught in my throat. $20,000. Just weeks after they told me they couldn't help with a down payment on a reliable, safe car for me to get to my job where I saved actual human lives. The shock must have been evident on my face, because my mother's expression softened with a hint of pity. "Oh, sweetie, don't look like that. It's different. Emily is pursuing an art. It's a calling. You have a trade. A very respectable one, of course. But you don't need help. You're fine." There it was again. That word, fine. It was a cage they had built for me, and I had willingly locked myself inside. Being fine meant I got nothing. It meant I was strong enough to carry my own weight, so they felt comfortable adding the weight of everyone else onto my shoulders, too. My strength wasn't a virtue to them. It was a resource to be exploited. And as I sat there, listening to them plan Emily's dream while my own went completely unacknowledged, I realized that I wasn't just the forgotten daughter. I was the one who was funding the remembering of everyone else. The dinner was supposed to be a celebration. That was the official story anyway, proclaimed on the glittery, hand-lettered invitations designed by Emily herself. We were celebrating the grand opening of her art gallery, Etheria, a small, chic space in a newly gentrified part of town where exposed brick and Edison bulbs commanded astronomical rent. I knew the exact figure, of course, because the first 3 months' deposit, a staggering 5-figure sum, had been transferred directly from my savings account. The day of the dinner, I stood in front of my closet, the invitation sitting on my dresser. I felt a familiar, weary sense of dread, mixed with a stubborn, stupid flicker of hope. I had told myself the money for Emily was a loan, a lie so thin it was transparent. But I had also let myself believe it was an investment in something more than her gallery. Maybe it was an investment in my own visibility. Maybe tonight, surrounded by her success, a success I had secretly bankrolled, they would see me. Maybe my contribution, however hidden, would somehow radiate outwards and finally make me real to them. Before leaving my apartment, I sat at my small desk and made one last transfer. It was for the gallery's electricity bill, which Emily had tearfully called me about that morning, saying she'd totally forgotten and the power was about to be shut off hours before her opening party. "You're the best, Cammy. I'll pay you back next week, I promise," she'd chirped before hanging up. I clicked confirm, watching my savings account balance dip again. It felt like a secret ritual, a bitter offering at the altar of my family's happiness. I chose a simple, elegant black dress. My armor. It was understated and professional like me. When I arrived at the restaurant, a trendy, loud place with a menu I knew for a fact my parents couldn't afford, the celebration was in full swing. My parents were at the head of a long table, holding court. My mother wore a new silk dress, its vibrant colors a stark contrast to my muted black. My father was telling a booming story to Lucas about a recent golf game, his voice drowning out all others. Emily, of course, was the star. She glowed, draped in a bohemian-style dress, accepting toasts and praise with the practiced grace of someone who has never known anything else. To Emily, my dad said, raising his wine glass high. The crystal caught the light, who had the courage to follow her passion and create something truly beautiful. We are so proud. Everyone cheered. I raised my glass too, the forced smile on my face feeling tight and brittle. Courage, I thought, a bitter taste rising in my throat. It's easy to have courage when someone else is paying your bills. I tried to catch Emily's eye, to share a small conspiratorial glance, our secret, but she was already looking past me, waving at a friend across the room. The conversation swirled around me, a dizzying vortex of Emily, Emily's art, Emily's gallery, Emily's brilliant future, Emily's insightful interview with a local art blogger. I sat there, a ghost at the feast, pushing a piece of salmon around my plate. I tried to join in, to find a foothold in the conversation. When my mother mentioned how stressful the opening had been, I saw a small opening. I can only imagine, I said. Things get so intense when you're responsible for other people. At the hospital last week, Emily cut me off with a light tinkling laugh. Oh my God, Mom. Speaking of intense, you should have seen the caterer I had to deal with. A total nightmare. The conversation veered back to her, and I was left in the wake, my sentence trailing off into silence. Later I tried with Lucas. How are the kids? I asked. Does Michael still love that science kit I got him? I had spent a lot of time picking it out, remembering my own childhood love for experiments. They're fine, he said, his eyes already scanning the room. Hey Dad, did you see the quarterly earnings report from Sterling Corp? Unbelievable. He turned his back to me completely, leaning in to talk stocks with our father. Fine. The kids were fine. I was fine. Everyone they didn't want to think about was fine. It was then that the jokes started. They were always at my expense. Little digs disguised as affectionate teasing, designed to reinforce my role as the boring, sensible one, against which their own sparkling lives could be measured. We should get Emily to paint your portrait. Camilla, Lucas said with a smirk, turning back to me now that he had an audience. She could call it Woman Married to Her Stethoscope, Dad chuckled. She'd have to get you to stand still for 5 minutes first. Always running around that one. Work. It's the scrubs, Emily added, waving her fork theatrically. They're just not inspiring. So, beige, they all laughed. It felt like they were throwing pebbles at me, small and insignificant one by one, but their collective impact was bruising my skin. I just sat there, stirring the foam on my cappuccino, the smile on my face feeling more and more like a mask made of cracking plaster. My stability was a joke to them. My independence was a character flaw. I decided to try one last time, to share something real, something that mattered. Something that proved my life was more than just beige. Actually, I said, my voice a little louder than I intended. It was a pretty incredible week at work. We had a patient, a construction worker, who came in with a piece of rebar through his chest. It was a miracle it missed his heart, just by a centimeter. I could picture the trauma bay, the controlled chaos, the incredible ballet of doctors and nurses working as one. I was the one who spotted the internal bleeding on the ultrasound. We had to get him into the OR in under 5 minutes. It took a team of 6 of us 4 hours to stabilize him. I remembered the intense, focused silence, the smell of antiseptic, the incredible, soaring feeling when the surgeon finally said, "He's going to make it." I had saved a man's life. It was the opposite of beige. It was life and death, painted in colors they couldn't even imagine. I looked around the table, hoping for a flicker of interest, of awe, of anything. My mother just glanced at me, her nose wrinkled in distaste. "Oh, Camilla, please," she said, her voice dripping with condescension. "Not while we're eating. It's so morbid. And honestly, a bit of an attention grab." She immediately turned back to Emily, her face softening into a beatific smile. "Now, Em, tell your father about the critic from the Art Gazette who stopped by." And just like that, I was erased. My story, my work, my entire world, dismissed as a morbid, attention-seeking ploy. A man's life hanging in the balance was less important than the opinion of a local blogger. The knot in my stomach tightened into a ball of ice. By the time dessert arrived, a fancy platter of miniature pastries I knew I would end up paying for on my next secret transfer to my mother's account, I had retreated into complete silence. That's when my mother, flush with wine and pride for her 2 golden children, looked at me. Maybe she saw the flicker of pain in my eyes. Maybe she saw the mask had finally crumbled. Or maybe she just wanted to land the final killing blow to win the night. She sighed dramatically, a theatrical, mournful sound, and reached over to pat my hand with her cold fingers. "You know," she said, her voice loud enough for the whole table to hear. "Sometimes I just think life would have been so much simpler." She paused for comedic effect. "I wish you were never born." It was meant to be the ultimate punchline, and to them, it was hilarious. Lucas roared with laughter, slapping the table so hard the water glasses jumped. Emily covered her mouth, her shoulders shaking with mirth. Even Dad, my own father, let out a deep, rumbling chuckle, shaking his head as if to say, "Oh, you." What a card. But I didn't laugh. In that one brutal moment, the whole world stopped. The clinking of cutlery, the murmur of the restaurant, the very beating of my own heart, it all went silent. All I could hear was that laugh, the sound of my entire family laughing at the idea of my non-existence. They weren't just dismissing my achievements anymore. They were dismissing my very being. And in their laughter, I heard the cold, hard truth of 30 years. I wasn't the responsible one or the forgotten one. I was the disposable one. A fire started in my chest. It wasn't a hot, raging inferno of anger that screams and throws things. It was a cold, quiet burn, the kind that turns wood to steel. It was the precise, controlled flame of a sterilized scalpel. It crept up my throat, a feeling so intense it should have made me choke, but it never reached my face. My expression remained placid, almost serene. I had spent a lifetime learning how to hide my feelings, to present a calm, competent exterior, no matter what chaos was unfolding inside. That skill, born of neglect, now became my greatest weapon. It was my armor. I looked at each of them, my gaze moving slowly around the table, a dispassionate observer cataloging specimens. Lucas, wiping a tear of authentic laughter from his eye. Emily, preening under the attention, her smile a beautiful, cruel slash of red lipstick. My father, blissfully unaware, chuckling along to keep the peace, to keep the mood light. And my mother, the architect of the moment, smiling, so proud of her witty, devastating remark. They looked like a perfect family, a portrait of joy, a joy built on the casual public execution of my spirit. They thought I would cry, or protest, or just absorb it as I always had. They were waiting for me to play my part, the hurt daughter, the wet blanket. Instead, I picked up my fork, which was still resting on the side of my untouched plate of cheesecake. I held it lightly between my thumb and forefinger. I smiled. It wasn't the pained, people-pleasing smile they were used to. This one was different. It didn't reach my eyes. It was sharp at the edges. My voice, when I spoke, was perfectly even. It didn't tremble. It didn't rise. It was as calm and sterile as the operating rooms where I spent my days, a place where panic was a death sentence. Then, I said, meeting my mother's eyes directly, "I guess you'll love what I'm about to do." The laughter died instantly. It was as if I had pulled the plug on a stereo, plunging the entire table into a sudden, shocked silence. Lucas's smile faltered, replaced by a look of confused irritation. Emily's hand froze on its way to her wine glass, her painted nails hovering in the air. My dad's face clouded over with the vague disapproval he reserved for any breach of social etiquette. They didn't understand what I meant. Of course they didn't. In their world, I didn't do things. I was a resource, not an actor. I was the person things were done to. I was the recipient of their jokes, their demands, their problems. The idea of me taking action, of me having a plan of my own that didn't involve them, was so alien that they couldn't even begin to process it. But I knew exactly what I meant. In that moment of absolute chilling clarity, a plan bloomed in my mind, fully formed and terrifyingly simple. For years, I had been their silent partner, their unacknowledged benefactor, their human ATM, and as I sat there, the echo of their laughter still hanging in the air, a cold, efficient triage of my financial ties to them began to scroll through my mind like a patient's chart. The mortgage. I remembered the day 2 years ago in the sterile office of the bank. My parents had been turned down for refinancing. Their credit was a mess. My father, looking helpless and smaller than I'd ever seen him, had said, "Cammy, it's just a formality. We just need your good name on the paperwork. We'll handle everything." I signed. 6 months later, the first late payment call came to me, the cosigner. My mother had sighed on the phone, "Things are just so tight, sweetie. Could you just cover it this once?" That once had turned into a permanent, unacknowledged auto-pay from my account to theirs on the 28th of every month. The utility bills. I remembered the phone call from my mother a year ago. "Camilla, I just can't figure out all these online passwords and portals. It's a nightmare. You're so good with computers. Would it be easier if we just had them sent to you?" Easier for whom? I thought even then. But I'd agreed. And for a year, a portion of my paycheck was siphoned off to keep their lights on and their house warm. Emily's studio. The sisterly investment. I pictured Emily in my apartment, crying over a cup of herbal tea about how she'd never fulfill her potential without a dedicated space. "It's my dream, Cammy," she had whispered. "I'll pay you back from my first big sale, I swear." I transferred the money. There had been no big sale. Only more requests. Dad's car insurance. My premium had doubled the day I added him to my policy. He was uninsurable on his own. "You're saving my skin, kiddo," he'd said, clapping me on the shoulder. He promised to give me the cash for his portion every month. In the last year, he had paid me twice, both times after I had awkwardly reminded him. Lucas's son's daycare. He and Sarah were overwhelmed, and their budget was a disaster. "It was just a little help," he'd said, "to get us through this rough patch." That rough patch had lasted 18 months and cost me over $10,000. They thought these were favors. They thought it was just Camilla helping out. They never saw the truth, that it was a system. A complex parasitic financial ecosystem where I was the unwilling host. They had, piece by piece, outsourced the responsibilities of their own lives to me, and they didn't even have the decency to be grateful. Instead, they mocked the very stability that kept them afloat. Tonight, the host was rejecting the parasites. I pushed my chair back from the table, the legs scraping softly against the polished floor, a sound that felt deafening in the silence. I placed my napkin neatly beside my untouched plate. "Thank you for dessert," I said to the silent, staring table. "I have to get going. Early shift tomorrow." It was a lie. I had the next 3 days off, but they didn't know my schedule. They never asked. I turned and walked away without looking back. I could feel their eyes on my back. A mixture of confusion and annoyance. I didn't care. The pain that had been a constant dull ache in my chest for 30 years was finally gone. In its place was a strange, cold calm, a sense of absolute purpose. On the drive home, I didn't cry. The city lights streaked past my car windows in blurry lines. I replayed the scene at the table not with pain, but with the detached analysis of a clinician reviewing a case. Diagnosis, terminal toxicity. Prognosis, poor, unless a radical intervention is performed. Prescription, amputation. When I got to my quiet, orderly apartment, I didn't fall apart. I walked in, put my keys in the small bowl by the door, and made myself a cup of chamomile tea. Then I walked to my desk, sat down, and pulled a thick black binder from the bottom drawer. The label on the spine, printed in my neat, clear handwriting, read, "Family Expenses." The pivot was not just an emotional reaction. It was a calculated, documented, and long overdue procedure. And it was about to begin. The drive home was a silent, 20-minute transition between two worlds. I left the loud, clattering restaurant where my existence had been debated as a hypothetical inconvenience and entered the quiet sanctuary of my car. The city lights streaked past, a river of reds and golds, but I saw none of it. My focus had turned inward, to a place of absolute crystalline clarity. There were no tears. The time for tears was over. They were a currency I had spent my entire life, and they had purchased me nothing. Tonight, the emotional well had run dry, and in its place was a vast, calm desert of resolve. When I arrived at my apartment, the silence that greeted me was not loneliness, but peace. It was the clean, orderly silence of my own life, a life I had built and paid for myself. I walked in, put my keys in the small ceramic bowl by the door, a piece Emily had made in a pottery class I had paid for, and went straight to the kitchen. I didn't pour a glass of wine or seek comfort in food. I made a cup of chamomile tea, the ritual slow and deliberate. The whistle of the kettle was the only sound, a sharp, clean note in the quiet. Cup in hand, I walked to the small desk in the corner of my living room. I sat down and without a moment's hesitation pulled open the bottom drawer. There it was, a thick 3-ring binder, heavy and black. The label on the spine, printed from my label maker in a neat, clear font, read, "Family Expenses." I had started it about 3 years ago, not as a weapon, but as a coping mechanism. It was a way to make sense of the constant drain on my finances and my energy. It began as a simple spreadsheet to track the loans I knew would never be repaid. But over time, it had evolved. It had become the official record of my invisibility, the silent testament to the 1,000 ways I was being bled dry. Opening it now felt different. It was no longer a sad diary of my own exploitation. It was a manual for my liberation. I placed the binder on the desk and opened it. The pages were divided by neat tabs. Parents, Lucas, Emily. Inside was a meticulous, almost obsessive archive of my family's dependency. Every Venmo transfer was printed out. The memo line, "Studio supplies. You the best. Daycare dar. Help." Highlighted in a sickly yellow. Every credit card statement with a charge for their groceries, their gas, their dinners was marked with a red pen. There were copies of checks, bank transfer confirmations, and scribbled IOUs on napkins that were a joke even when they were written. Beside each entry in my small, precise handwriting was a running total. The number was staggering, well into the six figures. It was a down payment on a house. It was a retirement. It was a life I had given away piece by piece. For a moment, I just stared at the pages, at the sheer, documented weight of my role as the family's secret foundation. There was no anger. The emotion was colder, purer than that. It was the feeling a surgeon must have looking at an X-ray of a malignant tumor. A clear, objective understanding of what needed to be cut out. I turned on my laptop. The glow of the screen illuminated my face. The process was methodical. I was a nurse executing a protocol, following a series of steps with precision and care. First, the mortgage. I logged into my online banking portal. I navigated to the bill pay section, my fingers moving quickly and surely across the keyboard. There it was, the recurring monthly payment to my parents' mortgage lender. I remembered the day I'd set it up. My mother had been on the phone, crying about how the interest rates were killing them and they might lose the house. Just for a few months, Cammy, she'd pleaded. Just until your father's commission check comes in. The commission check never came. I clicked the button, Cancel Recurring Payment. A small box popped up. Are you sure you want to delete this payment series? I clicked yes. A green check mark appeared. The first thread was cut. Next, the utilities. This was more complicated. My mother had been right. It was a hassle of passwords and portals, but I was the one who had set them all up, so I had the credentials saved in a secure file. I logged into the gas company's website. My credit card was listed as the primary payment method. Remove card. Confirmation box. Yes. I did the same for the electric company, the water company, and the cable and internet bundle. One by one, I erased myself from their basic infrastructure, the lights they were reading by, the water they showered with, the television they watched. I was no longer paying for any of it. Then Emily. This one was a direct transfer I had scheduled from my savings account. It was due to go out in 3 days, on the first of the month, to her gallery's landlord. I found the scheduled transfer, and with a single, satisfying click, it was gone. I thought of her, glowing at the restaurant, talking about the courage it took to be an artist. Her courage had a name, and it was my savings account, and it was now closed for business. Next, my father's car insurance. This required a phone call. I looked at the clock. It was late, but the 24/7 customer service line would be open. I dialed the number and navigated the automated menu. A pleasant-sounding woman answered. I need to remove a driver from my policy, I said, my voice calm and even. I gave her my father's name and date of birth. All right, ma'am, the woman said. Just so you know, removing this driver will significantly decrease your premium. Your new monthly rate will be... She told me the number, and it was less than half of what I had been paying. The financial cost of my family was a concrete, quantifiable thing. And when would you like this change to be effective? She asked. Immediately, I replied. Finally, Lucas, the daycare. It was a weekly payment made through a childcare app. I opened the app on my phone, went to the payment settings, and removed my bank account information. The next payment was scheduled for Monday. It would not go through. I thought of Lucas laughing the loudest at my mother's joke. He, the provider, the one who made partner, couldn't even pay for his own son's childcare without a subsidy from his boring sister. It took less than an hour. In 60 minutes of quiet, methodical clicks, I had completely dismantled the secret financial architecture that had supported my family for years. I had not acted out of rage or a desire for revenge. I had acted out of a sudden, profound, and unshakable sense of self-preservation. They had laughed at the wish for my non-existence. I had just granted it. I had made myself non-existent in their financial lives. I closed the binder. I shut down the laptop. I rinsed out my teacup and placed it in the dishwasher. My apartment was exactly as it had been when I arrived, but everything was different. The air felt lighter. I felt lighter. The immense, crushing weight of their collective need, a weight I had carried for so long I had forgotten it was there, was gone. I went to bed and fell into a deep, dreamless sleep for the first time in years. The floor they stood on had vanished. They just didn't know it yet. The silence that followed was a strange and beautiful thing. For 5 days, my phone didn't ring with a crisis. There were no breathless calls from my mother about a forgotten appointment, no frantic texts from Emily about a looming deadline, no sheepish voicemails from my father about a bill he couldn't cover. It was a quiet I hadn't experienced since I was a child. I spent the days off I was supposed to have. I went for a long walk in the park. I sat in a coffee shop and read a novel for 3 uninterrupted hours. I deep cleaned my apartment, scrubbing away the old and making space for the new. With every mundane task, I felt a sense of ownership over my own time, a feeling so novel it was exhilarating. I was living my life, on my schedule, and the absence of their chaos was like a calming balm on a burn I hadn't realized was constantly searing my skin. The storm broke on Thanksgiving Day. It was a Thursday. I had politely declined my mother's perfunctory invitation to dinner, texting a simple, "Sorry, I'm working." Another lie, but a necessary one. I was, in fact, sitting on my couch in my pajamas, watching a movie and eating a delicious, store-bought rotisserie chicken. It was the most peaceful holiday I'd had in a decade. The first text message arrived at 3:15 p.m. It was from my mother. "The power just went out. All the neighbors have theirs. Did you pay the electric bill?" I looked at the message on my phone screen. I felt a phantom urge, a conditioned reflex to solve the problem, to call the power company, to smooth things over, to fix it. I took a deep breath, set the phone face down on the cushion beside me, and took another bite of chicken. It was delicious. A few minutes later, the phone buzzed again. And again. It was a group text with my parents and siblings. "Mom, Camilla, I'm serious. The turkey is half cooked and the house is dark. We have guests coming in an hour. Call me. Dad, your mother is very upset. Whatever is going on, you need to fix this now." I continued to watch my movie. The hero was just discovering the conspiracy. I was discovering my freedom. My phone began to ring. The screen lit up with my mother's face. I pressed the silence button on the side of the phone and let it go to voicemail. The text became more frantic. "Lucas, Mom says the power is out. What's going on? Sarah and I are on our way with the kids. Emily, OMG, the gallery owner just called me. The rent check bounced. He said he's going to put a lock on the door if he doesn't have it by tomorrow. Camilla, did you forget to pay it?" Another call from Mom. Ignored. A new voicemail. "Camilla, this isn't funny. This is the most important dinner of the year and you are ruining it. You are being incredibly selfish. Call me back this instant." The tone had shifted from confusion to irritation to outright anger. I finished my chicken and put the plate in the sink. The phone was buzzing incessantly now, a furious insect on my couch. I picked it up and saw a string of missed calls and a dozen new messages. "Dad, the car insurance company called. They said my policy was canceled for non-payment 5 days ago. Do you know what this means?" "I can't drive." "I could be arrested." "Lucas, what the hell, Cam? I just got an email from Michael's daycare. Payment declined. They said he can't come back on Monday until the account is settled. Are you broke? Did you lose your job? What is happening?" "Emily, my landlord is threatening to sue me. He says I'm in breach of contract. This is my career, Camilla." My entire career. They were all spiraling. Their individual worlds, once safely propped up by my silent support, now collapsing simultaneously. And their first, second, and only thought was to blame me. It wasn't, did we forget to handle our own responsibilities? It was, what did Camilla do wrong? I had been so effective as their safety net that they didn't know how to function without it. They had forgotten how to fall, and now they were in free fall. And they were furious with me for not being there to catch them. I read each message with a strange sense of detachment. It was like reading a patient's chart. I could see the symptoms, understand the diagnosis, but the emotional contagion that used to overwhelm me was gone. Their panic was theirs. Their chaos was theirs. Their consequences were finally theirs. It was not my emergency. The final voicemail of the evening came from my mother. Her voice was no longer angry. It was cold, laced with a venomous fury that was far more chilling. "I don't know what kind of sick game you're playing, Camilla, but I know one thing. After today, after you have deliberately and maliciously ruined this holiday for your entire family, you are no longer welcome in this house. You have made your choice." The line went dead. I stood in my quiet kitchen, the only light coming from the television in the other room. "You have made your choice." She was right, I had. I chose the quiet of my own apartment over the noise of their expectations. I chose my own well-being over their comfort. I chose myself. I picked up my phone, but not to call them back. I opened my contacts list, found the group chat titled Family, and pressed Delete and Exit Conversation. Then, one by one, I blocked their numbers. Mom, Dad, Lucas, Emily. The silence that followed was absolute. It was a silence not of absence, but of presence. The presence of my own life, waiting to be lived. For the first time, their chaos wasn't mine to fix, and that felt more peaceful than any Thanksgiving I could ever remember. A week of perfect, uninterrupted silence passed. It was a revelation. I learned that my shoulders weren't naturally tense. They had been held that way for years, braced for the next incoming call, the next demand. In the quiet, they began to relax. I slept through the night without waking up at 3 a.m. to the phantom buzz of my phone. I went to work, came home, and the time in between was entirely my own. The silence from my family wasn't a punishment. It was a gift. It was the sound of my own life beginning. The peace was shattered the following Thursday. It was just after 7 p.m. I was home from a shift, still in my scrubs, when a loud, insistent banging started at my apartment door. It wasn't a polite knock. It was an angry, demanding summons. I knew instantly who it was. My building had a security entrance. Only someone who had been let in or knew the code could get to my floor. I looked through the peephole and my stomach clenched. Lucas and Emily stood in the hallway, their faces grim and set. Lucas looked like he was about to kick the door down. Emily stood slightly behind him, her arms crossed, her expression a mask of righteous indignation. They looked like a delegation, sent from the fallen kingdom to demand the return of their queen, or more accurately, their court jester and treasury. For a moment, I considered not answering. I could stand here, in the safety of my apartment, until they gave up and went away. But I knew they wouldn't. And more than that, I realized I wasn't afraid anymore. The fear of their disapproval, of their anger, had been the cage I lived in for 30 years. I had just spent a week outside of it, and I wasn't going back in. I took a deep breath, turned the deadbolt, and opened the door. I didn't open it all the way, just enough to block the entrance with my body. I leaned against the doorframe, my expression calm. "Hello, Lucas, Emily. Are you out of your mind?" Lucas started, his voice a low growl. He tried to push past me into the apartment, but I didn't move. "What the hell are you doing, Camilla?" "She's punishing us," Emily cut in, her voice sharp and accusatory. "Because of one little joke. One joke. And you decide to blow up the entire family. Do you have any idea what you've done?" I looked from her tear-streaked, furious face to my brother's tense, angry one. I felt a strange sense of calm settle over me. They were loud. They were emotional. And I was none of those things. "I know exactly what I've done," I said, my voice even. "I've stopped paying your bills." The bluntness of the statement seemed to stun them into a brief silence. They were prepared for a fight, for tears, for a screaming match. They weren't prepared for simple, undeniable facts. Lucas recovered first, shifting tactics from anger to condescending reason, the voice he probably used on his clients. "Look, Cammy, we're a family. We help each other out. That's what families do. If you were having money problems, you should have just said something. We could have worked it out, made a budget." The hypocrisy was so astounding it was almost funny. He was going to lecture me about a budget. "You're right," I said, my voice still quiet. "Families do help each other. But what we were doing wasn't help. Help is temporary. Help is a two-way street. This was a system of dependency. My dependency was my money, and your dependency was everything else? That's not fair," Emily cried out. "You have a good job. You have all this money saved up. I'm a struggling artist. You know how hard it is for me. You offered to help." "I offered to help you get started," I corrected her gently. "I didn't offer to fund your entire life indefinitely. There's a difference. You are punishing the whole family," Lucas repeated, his voice rising again. "Mom and Dad are a mess. Dad can't drive to work. Their house is freezing cold. And all because your feelings got hurt." He said the word feelings like it was something dirty. That was it. That was the core of their argument. That my feelings, my dignity, my very existence were trivial things that should never be allowed to inconvenience them. My pain was a luxury tax they were unwilling to pay. "My feelings didn't just get hurt, Lucas," I said, and for the first time, a sliver of the cold fire I felt at the restaurant crept into my voice. "Mom wished I was never born and you all laughed. You laughed at the idea of me not existing. You cannot trivialize that. You don't get to." They had no response to that. They just stared at me. It was clear they had hoped this would be a simple matter of bullying me back into submission. They were realizing it wouldn't be. I held up a hand. "Wait here a moment." I closed the door, leaving them standing in the hallway. I walked to my desk and picked up a thick manila envelope I had prepared days ago. Inside were copies. Copies of everything. The bank statements showing the mortgage payments, the utility bills, the Venmo history to Emily, the daycare payment confirmations for Lucas. 3 years of their lives, paid for by me, printed out in black and white. I opened the door again. They looked startled, as if they'd thought I'd locked them out for good. I held out the heavy envelope to Lucas. He took it, his brow furrowed in confusion. "You said I'm punishing the family," I said, my voice soft again, all the fire gone, replaced by a profound and weary finality. "No," I looked straight into his eyes. I'm stopping the punishment of me. Lucas opened the clasp and pulled out the first few pages. It was a summary sheet I had created, with each of their names and a grand total next to it. I watched his eyes scan the numbers. I saw the color drain from his face. He fumbled with the papers, and a few of Emily's Venmo receipts fluttered to the floor. She bent to pick one up and froze, staring at her own words printed on the page. Gallery lights. Texts are a lifesaver. They looked up at me, their faces pale, the smugness and anger completely gone, replaced by a raw, naked panic. It was the look of people who had not only been caught, but had been forced to see the full scale of their own hypocrisy. They had no comeback. There was nothing to say. The numbers didn't lie. The proof was in their hands. I think you should go now, I said quietly. They didn't argue. Lucas, clutching the envelope like it was evidence in a crime, simply nodded, unable to meet my eyes. Emily looked at me, her mouth slightly open, as if she wanted to say something, but no words came out. They turned and walked down the hallway toward the elevator, their footsteps suddenly sounding heavy and slow. I closed my door, locked the deadbolt, and leaned against it. I didn't feel triumphant. I didn't feel happy. I just felt quiet. The showdown was over. There were no winners or losers. There was just the truth, laid bare on a stack of photocopied paper. And there was me, on the other side of a locked door, finally, irrevocably, free. The silence that followed the showdown was different. It was no longer a temporary peace. It was a permanent state of being. It was the silence of a severed connection, a clean and final cut. In that quiet, I realized that staying in the city, just 20 minutes away from the wreckage of my old life, was impossible. I would always be looking over my shoulder, always braced for another confrontation, another attempt to pull me back into their orbit. To truly be free, I had to truly leave. The decision, once made, felt liberating. It was the first major life choice I had ever made that was entirely for me, without considering their needs, their opinions, or their proximity. I started looking for nursing jobs in other states, focusing on places I'd always wanted to see, the mountains of Colorado, the coastline of Oregon. I sent out applications, my resume polished and professional. Within a month I had 3 offers. One, from a major hospital in Portland, Oregon, was particularly appealing. It was a position in the pediatric ICU, a challenging new field for me, and it came with a significant pay raise and a generous relocation bonus. I accepted the job without a second thought. The process of moving became my singular focus. I sold my furniture, packed my essential belongings into a dozen carefully labeled boxes, and put in my notice at St. Jude's and at my apartment complex. Each task was a step away from the old Camila, the responsible, invisible one. Each box I sealed was a nail in the coffin of that life. There were moments of fear, of course. The night before the movers were scheduled to arrive, I sat on the floor of my empty apartment, the echo of my own breathing loud in the space. A wave of loneliness washed over me, so intense it was dizzying. I was leaving everything I had ever known. I was walking away from my entire family. What if I was making a terrible mistake? What if I ended up completely alone 1,000 miles away? Then I thought of the restaurant. I thought of their laughter. I thought of the heavy silence in the hallway after Lucas and Emily had seen the contents of the envelope, and I knew. Loneliness was being in a room full of people who didn't see you. Solitude, the state I was choosing, was different. It was an opportunity to finally meet myself. The move to Portland was a rebirth. The air was different, clean and smelling of pine and rain. My new apartment was smaller than my old one, but it had a large balcony with a view of Mount Hood in the distance. I bought a new fiddle-leaf fig tree and placed it in a sunny corner. My new job was demanding but deeply rewarding. In the pediatric ICU, my competence and calm demeanor were not just appreciated, they were vital. I was part of a team that respected my skills and valued my input. My charge nurse would say things like, "Good catch, Camilla," or, "I need your eyes on this." I was visible. I was essential. I started to carry myself differently, my shoulders back, my head held high. The timid, accommodating woman who had been terrified of making waves was being replaced by a confident professional who knew her own worth. Slowly, cautiously, I began to build a life. Remembering my childhood love for science and nature, I joined a local hiking group I found online. The first time I went, I was nervous, a stranger among a group of seasoned friends, but they were welcoming and kind. They asked me questions about my life, and when I gave them the vague, edited version, "I moved here for a job, just wanted a change of scenery," they accepted it without prying. On a trail that wound through a forest of towering Douglas firs, a woman named Sarah asked me about my work. I told her about a particularly tough case, a little boy who had finally been able to go home after weeks on a ventilator. She listened, her eyes full of genuine interest and compassion. "That must be so incredibly difficult, but so rewarding," she said. "You must be very strong." Her words hit me with the force of a physical blow. No one in my family had ever called me strong as a compliment. To them, my strength was just a resource, a thing to be used. To this stranger on a hiking trail, it was a quality to be admired. I felt a lump form in my throat. But for the first time in a long time, it was from gratitude, not grief. I started taking weekends for myself, driving to the coast to watch the waves crash against the rocks or exploring the city's famous bookstores. The silence from my family became a background hum, then a whisper, and finally, it faded away completely. It wasn't a painful, lonely silence anymore. It was peace. One day, about a year after I moved, I was sitting in a cafe and saw a family at a nearby table that reminded me of them. A domineering mother, a passive father, a loud favored son, and a quiet daughter who seemed to be shrinking in her chair. I watched them, but I didn't feel the familiar sting of anger or sadness. I felt a strange, detached sense of pity. I saw them for what they were, a deeply broken system that required a scapegoat to function. Their jokes, their praise for the golden children, their dismissal of the quiet one. It was all a carefully constructed performance to avoid looking at their own failings. Without me to absorb the dysfunction, to fix the problems, to be the butt of the jokes, their perfect little unit would have to find a new target. I suspected they were now turning on each other. The jokes probably weren't so funny when there was no one left to laugh but themselves. I finished my coffee, left a tip, and walked out into the cool Portland air. I had not defeated them. I had simply resigned from the game, and in doing so, I had finally won back my own life. 2 years have passed since I left. I'm still in Portland. My fiddle leaf fig tree is thriving, its big waxy leaves reaching toward the ceiling. My life is quiet, but it's a rich, fulfilling quiet. It's filled with the laughter of new friends, the challenge of a career that I love, and the profound peace of waking up in the morning, knowing that my day belongs only to me. I never heard from my family again after that day in the hallway. No angry calls, no letters, no attempts at an apology. Their silence was the final confirmation of the truth. I was only valuable to them as long as I was useful. Once the services were canceled, so was I. There was a time when this realization would have shattered me. Now, it is simply a fact, an old diagnosis in a chart from a life that no longer feels like mine. I have forgiven them, but not for them. I forgave them in the quiet of my own heart, a final act of letting go, of releasing the poison so that I could fully heal. Forgiveness for me did not mean reconciliation. It did not mean going back to their table and pretending their laughter hadn't torn me apart. It simply meant that I no longer allowed them to occupy space in my heart or my head. I granted their wish. The Camilla they knew, the one who existed only to serve them, was truly never born again. I built a new life, not from scratch, but from the strong foundation that had been there all along, the one they had taken for granted. My resilience, my competence, my compassion, these were not flaws to be exploited, but strengths to be celebrated. My mother once wished I'd never been born. In a way, I granted that wish. I removed the daughter they had created, the one who was a function and not a person. By disappearing from their lives, I finally allowed myself to be born into my own. Sometimes absence isn't defeat. It's freedom. It's the ultimate act of choosing yourself. If you have ever been dismissed, minimized, or made to feel invisible by the people who are supposed to see you most clearly, remember this. No is a full sentence. Your worth is not determined by your usefulness to others. Hit like if you believe respect should always come before obligation. Subscribe for more stories of people who chose themselves over toxic family ties.